Okay, so when you hear a name like Tuareg or maybe Berber, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Is it those classic images maybe of veiled desert nomads, ancient traders, perhaps something else? Well, our deep dive today, we're going to take you way beyond those common perceptions. We're getting into a history that's just incredibly rich, really complex, and honestly filled with some surprising global connections you might not expect. We are embarking on a deep dive into the story of the Amazigh people. Our mission here is to cut through all the noise, the information overload, and really distill the key insights from, well, a whole range of sources. We're talking historical texts, linguistic studies, archaeological finds, the works. We want to explore their true names, dig into their fascinating and, often debated origins, uncover the resilience of their language, and even trace their surprising global reach, which frankly challenges some conventional historical narratives.
And that's exactly it. The sources we've looked at for this are incredibly comprehensive. We're drawing from ancient accounts, people like Herodotus, Ibn Khaldun, right up to modern linguistic analysis and archaeological discoveries that are still shedding new light. It really is a journey to understand a people who've left such an indelible mark, not just across millennia in North Africa, but, as you said, in some really unexpected places, too.
Okay, great. So let's start unpacking this. We often hear the term Tuareg, but that's not actually how these incredible people refer to themselves, is it? What do they prefer to be called?
That's exactly right. Tuareg is, well, it's an external label. The people themselves, they prefer Imuhar. That's especially true in places like Libya and Algeria. Now, in Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, you're more likely to hear Imushar or Imasharin. But what's really key here is the meaning. In their own language, Keltamashek, Imuhar basically means free man or noble man. It's a name that carries this profound sense of honor, dignity. It really reflects their core identity.
Right, free man. That's powerful. And then there's that other term, Berber. You hear it all the time, but it can be quite controversial, can't it? Where does that name even come from?
It definitely has a problematic history. The term Berber, it has these pejorative origins. It traces back to the Greek barbaros or the Latin barbarus. And these were terms used basically to describe foreigners the Greeks saw as uncivilized, or simply people whose language just sounded like unintelligible noise to them, like gibberish.
Gibberish, right.
Yeah, and it's even thought that Arabs might have later borrowed it. There's an Arabic word, barbara, that means something like to babble confusedly.
Wow. That's such a stark contrast to their own self-identification as free men. And what about other external names like Tawarik? I read that comes from an Arabic verb meaning to abandon, orger, which apparently led to descriptions like the abandonment of God for their warriors. Why such different views?
It really speaks volumes about perception versus self-identity, doesn't it? Tawarik is another example of an outside label, reflecting how others saw them, maybe seeing their independence or nomadic ways as, being abandoned or separate. And their visual identity also plays into these external perceptions. They're often called the blue people, right? Because the indigo dye from their traditional clothing can actually stain their skin. And then there's the very distinctive lithum, the veil that covers the face, leaving only the eyes exposed. Very iconic.
So beyond the names and the visuals, where are the Imuhar mainly located, geographically speaking?
They're predominantly found right across the Sahel region. You'll find them along the coasts and hinterlands of modern-day Libya, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, Algeria, Morocco. It's a vast area. Even the ancient Greek historian Herodotus mentioned nomads living between Egypt and Jared. He described a similar diet, meat and milk. It seems to fit. And the Imuhar themselves, they have this really powerful, almost poetic saying, "There is no trace of men's activity in the desert that is not of their own." Yeah, it really underscores their deep, deep historical connection to that land. And within the broader Imuhar people, you can generally see two main groups. You've got the northern, or Saharan Imuhar. These include groups like the Kalahagar and Kalyujar, mostly in Fazan and Tasli. Then, and they're much more numerous, you have the southerners. These are the Nigerian and Malian Imuhar groups like the Afogas, the Uwalimidan, Kel Air, Tinjirigif. These southern groups historically held significant power. They even ruled over Timbuktu at one point.
Interesting.
But what's really striking, despite this geographical spread, maybe different nuances in lifestyle, there's this incredibly strong, undeniable sense of shared identity, of belonging among all these Imuhar groups.
Given that strong shared identity, how does it actually play out in their traditional way of life, their social structure?
Well, traditionally, they've been pastoralist nomads. And what's really remarkable is how well they've maintained their culture through that. Their lives are dynamic, flowing with nature. They adapt through seasonal migrations with their flocks, their livestock. Their resilience in what's often a pretty hostile environment is legendary. They've really, as one source put it, left their mark as standing strong in the face of adversity to safeguard their flocks and lands.
That kind of resilience often leads to quite structured societies, doesn't it? Can you tell us a bit about their traditional social hierarchy?
They certainly had a very distinct social stratification, traditionally. At the top, you had the Amazigh. These were the nobles, both respected warriors and people of faith. Below them were the Imachad, the vassals. Often these were descendants of tribes they had conquered in the past. Then you had the Imzalin, the blacksmiths, who played a really vital role in everyday life, making tools, weapons, jewelry. And historically, there were also the Eklin, who were essentially slaves, often captured during raids. Now, it's important to say slavery has been abolished, but culturally, some individuals from these groups did remain integrated within the society.
Interesting how these specialized roles developed. What about artisans and storytellers? They seem to have a particularly unique place.
Oh, absolutely. These are the Inhadanes, or Inidin, the skilled artisans, and also the griots, the storytellers. The men traditionally focused on things like carpentry, blacksmithing, while the women were masters of leatherwork, making jewelry, crafting beautiful cradles, cushions, things like that. And the griots, well, they're the keepers of the oral tradition. They're described as masters of the art of flattery and the art of storytelling. They convey these epic histories, these ancient tales, often accompanied by the sound of the tahardant guitar. It's quite something.
And their marital traditions, were they typically monogamous or was polygamy common?
Traditionally, monogamy was the standard practice, the most common form of marriage. However, polygamy was accepted, but usually under specific circumstances. It was mainly for socioeconomic reasons, sometimes political ones too. For, wealthier or more powerful individuals, it could be a way to forge alliances between families or strengthen their labor force, expand the household's influence.
Okay, so if we try to boil it all down, what are the absolute core values that really define the Imuhar culture? What are those foundational principles?
Yeah, looking at the sources, you can really identify 5 core values that deeply shape their identity. First, hospitality. It was paramount. They always welcomed travelers, guests, visitors, offering shelter, food, no questions asked, basically. Second, respect for elders. Deeply ingrained. Their wisdom, their experience was highly valued, seen as essential for guiding the community. Third, courage. This manifested especially in challenges and conflict. Warriors, fighters, they were held to incredibly high standards. Fourth, independence. You see this thread throughout their history, a long tale of independence and self-sufficiency, as one text puts it. It's almost a natural outcome of that nomadic life in the desert.
Right.
And finally, a strong code of honor. This involved upholding values like loyalty, virtue, and fiercely safeguarding the community's honor and integrity.
It sounds like a remarkably strong, resilient way of life. But as you mentioned, it's facing some serious challenges today.
Yes, very much so. Their traditional nomadic lifestyle is now described as fragilized. It's threatened by the degradation of the ecosystem, the desertification, and also the lack of livestock, the difficulties in maintaining their herds. It poses a huge challenge to a way of life that has endured for thousands of years.
Okay, now let's broaden the lens a bit because this is really compelling. When we talk about the Amazigh people, we're actually digging into a much bigger question. Who are the Amazigh? And just how complex are their origins?
Yeah, defining their origin is not a simple task, as one historian puts it. It's still very much debated among historians, linguists, and anthropologists. And that's largely because you're dealing with literally thousands of years of movement, contact, mixing between different peoples. But what's absolutely crucial to remember is that the people often called Berbers consistently refer to themselves as Amazigh, which, as we said, means free or noble. And that idea of freedom, it's described as totally non-negotiable to their identity. Encyclopedia Britannica, for instance, describes them pretty broadly as the pre-Arab dwellers of North Africa, a fragmented population stretching across Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Mali, Niger, Mauritania, with traces even found out in the Canary Islands, and some speculation, as we'll get into, about the Americas.
And the historian Gabriel Camps, he highlighted a whole range of theories about their origins, didn't he? It's definitely not just one straightforward answer.
Exactly. Camps laid out several really intriguing theories, which just shows the complexity of their deep past. It's fascinating. Some theories suggest connections way back to Persians, Medes, and Armenians. The idea is maybe they were brought by Hercules to Spain, then moved into Africa, mixed with local Libyans, Gaetulians, eventually becoming Moors or Numidians near Carthage. Another prominent theory is the Canaanite one. This was supported by Ibn Khaldun and Procopius. It suggests exiled coastal peoples from Joshua's conquest in the Levant settled in Libya, founded cities there. There's even speculation about a common genealogical origin through a figure named Amazigh, supposedly a son of Ham, grandson of Noah, linking them maybe to Philistines or Gurzians. Other theories look further east, suggesting Indian origins. Strabo supported this, drawing linguistic parallels, things like comparing Berber to Warlavara in Deccan, India, or noting the port of Berbera in Somalia, kind of like linguistic milestones.
Interesting linguistic links.
Then there's the Hyksos theory, suggesting people from Asia Minor, Syria, fled into Africa, blended with Libyans. Dr. Philippe Berthelon and Émile Chantre proposed a Greek or Aegean origin based on some amazing names and words that seem to have Greek or even pre-Hellenic roots. And then you get into the archaeology. The discovery of these megalithic tombs, these dolmens in North Africa, this led to theories linking them to the Gauls. Some early European travelers even called them Druidic.
Druidic, wow.
Yeah. Surgeon Paul Guion compared them to structures in France, suggesting links to Gauls or maybe even Vandals. Others thought they were Gallo-Roman tombs with Celtic ties. There were even 19th century theories proposing Nordic origins, trying to link the megalith builders and blonde populations found in parts of North Africa to Nordic peoples. Though, these were often driven by speculative ideas, early racial theories, and frequently misinterpreted the archaeological evidence.
Right, those early theories can be problematic.
Definitely. And finally, it's worth noting some Amazigh genealogists themselves actually claim Arab heritage, tracing lineage back to groups like the Luwada from Himayr in Arabia, though these claims are often seen as ambiguous, kind of blending historical migrations with later genealogical narratives. But what this whole range of theories really shows is just how deep, complex, and dynamic the Amazigh past is. Pinpointing one single origin is impossible. It speaks to millennia of movement and cultural fusion. But amidst all these different theories, one linguistic thread seems quite consistent: the root words Amazigh or Mzk. These are strongly supported as being authentic, ancient names, very likely the root of Amazigh itself. You find evidence of these roots in ancient records from places like Cyrenaica and Mauritania, and significantly, groups like the Imahari Mushar of West Fezzan, the Imagine of Arar, the Amazigh of Arez, the Rif, the High Atlas, they've consistently used names tied to these roots over centuries. It really reinforces their self-identity across time and space.
That's a fascinating point about the MZG root. Now, what about the name Numida or Numidian? That often comes up referring to people between Carthage and the Moors. What's the story there?
Yeah, the term Numida, it appears in Latin inscriptions, no doubt about that, but its actual Libyan or Punic roots, well, they remain uncertain. The similarity to the Greek word nomads, meaning nomads, is now widely considered just a coincidence, likely not the origin.
Oh, okay.
Most scholars believe the name probably has Berber origins, maybe linked to local Libyan names starting with M, but the exact origin, still a bit of a mystery, but probably not directly from Greek nomads. And speaking of linguistic roots, Gabriel Camps also mentioned an idea from T. Sarnell about the root ZWG, meaning to be read. Sarnell tried to link this phonetically to groups like the Zouix people in ancient Tunisia and the Azagaran of Hagar, both mentioned by Herodotus.
To be read. Interesting.
Yeah, but it shows the debate. Other linguists, like K.G. Prafs, strongly argue that phonetically and morphologically, you can hardly tie that root ZWG directly to those specific group names. So the linguistic detective work continues.
Right. Let's shift now to the Amazigh language itself, or rather, the languages. What do we know about their family tree, their origins, and spread?
Okay, so the various Amazigh languages, they belong to the broader Afro-Asiatic language family. This connects them way back to ancient southern Kemet Egypt and stretching up into northern Nubia. Some linguists, like Igor Diakonoff, have even pointed out possible deep connections with Semitic languages, suggesting really ancient linguistic ties across that entire region of North Africa and the Near East.
And they developed their own script, too, didn't they? One that's evolved over time.
Yes, they absolutely did. The earliest known script associated with the Amazigh is called the Libico-Berber script. This eventually evolved into the really unique Tifinagh script, which actually has many variations found across different Amazigh regions. Now, today you'll also see Latin and Arabic scripts being used to write Amazigh languages, but linguists like Andre Bassett studied ancient Libyan inscriptions, particularly in Tunisia and Algeria, which were fascinatingly bilingual, written alongside Punic and Latin.
Bilingual inscriptions, wow.
Yeah, and these give us crucial clues. They point to a local alphabet existing maybe 2,000 years ago and hint at possible relationships with other ancient language families, Hamido-Semitic, Egyptian, Semitic, maybe even Basque or Greek. It's complex.
So this language, or language family, it's clearly not new. It has incredibly ancient roots and a really widespread history.
Oh, absolutely. It's truly one of the oldest indigenous languages in North Africa, going back thousands of years. The thinking is, around 2000 BCE, Amazigh languages started spreading westward from the Nile Valley region. By about 1000 BCE, you had native speakers covering this huge area known to the Greeks, the Carthaginians, the Romans. You had tribes like the Mari, the Masacili, the Masili, Misulami, Gatuli, Garamantes. They founded powerful kingdoms. Now, while some areas like Numidia and Mauritania eventually merged with the Roman Empire in the late 2nd century BCE, other Amazigh kingdoms actually rose after the Vandal invasion in 429 CE and then the Byzantine takeover in 533 CE. They endured right up until the arrival of the Arabs between the 7th and 8th century CE. Shows incredible persistence.
And where is Amazigh spoken today? Across North Africa and maybe even beyond.
Andre Bassett mapped this out pretty well. In Morocco, it's widespread. Spoken in large mountainous areas like Jaqbiliyet, Tamazight areas, Bani, the Anti-Atlas, the Great and Middle Atlas regions, huge presence. In Algeria, it thrives in Kabylia, the Chawi region, also around the Shelif River, Constantine Touggourt, and notably the Mzab Valley, which is actually a UNESCO heritage site.
Wow, UNESCO site too.
Yeah, in Tunisia, it survives in about 13 villages in the south. In Libya, you find it notably in Zuwara on the coast, and Gadam's another UNESCO heritage site, an oasis town. And of course, for the Imohar, the Tuaregs, their language flourishes robustly across the vast desert areas of the Sahara.
It sounds like getting an exact count of Amazigh speakers must be incredibly difficult, especially with centuries of bilingualism and cultural mixing.
It is indeed very challenging. A big reason is that censuses often struggle to distinguish between Amazigh and Arabic speakers because so many people are bilingual. But the estimations generally suggest that Amazigh speakers might make up roughly half of Morocco's population, maybe about a third of Muslims in Algeria, and certainly hundreds of thousands elsewhere. The language is still very much alive and vibrant in places like Mauritania, Tunisia, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and even the Siwa oasis way over in Egypt. And current conditions, with more recognition in some countries, are actually allowing for its continued growth and revitalization.
Have other languages left a significant mark on Amazigh vocabulary over the centuries?
Oh, definitely. You can see noticeable influence, especially from Greco-Latin, particularly in certain regional dialects. It's like a linguistic snapshot of historical contact. You find examples like Apollos or Angelus for infant, or Ebris Birches for the burnous cloak, Tiphyrus eris for pear tree, even Afril hospitale for a guest room, or gesti from Latin lector for bed. But these borrowings, while clear, tend to be mostly regional, reflecting those specific points of interaction. What's interesting is the difference between North and South Imohar Tuareg. The Imohar of the South, because of their trade routes and interactions stretching across the Sahara into Sudanic Africa, they actually borrowed words from Black African languages like Songhai and Hausa.
Different influences then.
Exactly. This contrasts with some other Amazigh languages, maybe further north, that borrowed really heavily from Arabic, sometimes even conceptually replacing Amazigh terms. But the Imohar of the North, largely due to their social structures and geographical isolation in the deep desert, they have been able to conserve their language, though the Islamization, which is quite remarkable, social and geographic factors really protected it. And just to circle back to their own unique alphabet, the Tifinagh, or Tafines, as the Imohar call it, it's thought its name might find roots in a kind of Berberized etymology from the Latin word punica, referring to Phoenician Carthaginian things. It's mainly used for short inscriptions. You see it on rocks, shields, jewelry. It's very much a local script, not entirely uniform across all groups. And for a long time, outsiders mistakenly thought it was actually Phoenician script.
Okay, let's zoom out again and take an even deeper look into how the Amazigh population itself emerged. We're talking early migrations, cultural mixing.
Right. If we look at North Africa before the Arab conquest in the 7th century, the picture emerging is of a spectrum of people from dark-skinned melanated to light skin. It wasn't uniform. There's archaeological evidence suggesting a significant northward migration of Neolithic peoples, described as melanated, coming up from the Sudan region maybe 5,000 years earlier. This was during a period when the Sahara was much greener, more fertile, facilitating movement. And the concept of proto-Berbers emerges from this deep past. It's seen as a blend, a fusion of several ancient North African cultures. You have elements from the Ibero-Mauritian culture, dating way back to 13,000 BCE, the Mekta Afou people, known for being tall, having specific dental modifications. They seem to vanish around 9,000 BCE. Then the Capsian culture appears around 7,000 BCE, thought to be of Mediterranean origin, described sometimes with negroid features, settling near water sources, using ostrich eggs distinctively. They declined around 4,500 BCE. And then comes the Neolithic influence, bringing ceramics perhaps from the Sahara around 7,000 BCE, cattle domestication. This Neolithic wave seems to combine with and build upon those earlier cultures. So the Amazigh population emerges from this really ancient, complex mixing pot of different foundational groups.
It sounds like significant cultural exchanges were already happening long before the famous civilizations like Carthage rose to prominence.
Absolutely. By around 3000 BCE, yes, North Africa did become more isolated as the Sahara expanded. But crucially, it didn't lose all contact. Connections were maintained, especially with the Iberian Peninsula and Mediterranean islands like Sicily, Sardinia, Malta. We see evidence like similarities in pottery styles, the introduction of new materials like copper, then bronze. This all indicates ongoing trade, cultural exchange. It shows North Africa was already fused itself with the broader network of the Mediterranean long before Carthage became dominant. That climate shift from humid to arid really peaking by the middle of the 3rd millennium BCE, it definitely increased isolation. North Africa started to function more like an island, as some archaeologists describe it, with communication routes limited, primarily through the Tripolitania region in modern Libya.
Like an island. Interesting analogy.
Yeah, but even with that relative isolation, new connections still developed. Especially again with Iberia and the Mediterranean islands. We find archaeological evidence, like specific types of ceramics found at Garkahal Cave in Morocco, suggesting early maritime trade routes that actually predate the Phoenician era. And we see clear cultural borrowings from Europe too, certain tomb designs, pottery styles appearing in North Africa, and importantly, even though the Sahara became a massive barrier, it didn't completely sever ties with deeper Africa, with sub-Saharan Africa. There were still fertile marginal areas, oases, river valleys that facilitated contact between these Libyco-Amazigh populations and groups the Greeks often referred to broadly as Ethiopians.
And Ethiopians back then didn't mean what it means today, right?
Exactly. It was a Greek term for a whole range of people south of Egypt, not a specific modern nationality or race. Ancient accounts describe various physical features among these populations, and importantly, burial sites, for instance, among the Garamantes and the Sahara, indicate a composite of racial characterization. You find a mix of features. What this really does is refute simplistic, monolithic racial interpretations. It shows that ancient North Africa was a place of considerable human diversity and mixing challenging neat categories.
That's a crucial point. Now let's look at how these diverse Amazigh groups themselves have been categorized. The famous 14th century historian Ibn Khaldun had a system, didn't he?
He did. Ibn Khaldun, who was himself of Andalusian origin with likely Amazigh connections, provided a foundational, though broad, categorization. He divided the Amazigh primarily into 2 major groups, or maybe confederations. The first was the Bet, or Butar. The dominant branch here was the Zenata, who were largely nomadic, migrating from the east and occupying the northern Sahara belt. The second group was the Brains, or Baranis. This included the Masmuda, who were mainly sedentary farmers occupying mountainous Morocco, and also the Sanhaja, who were fascinating because they adopted both sedentary and nomadic lifestyles, living across Sabwia, eastern Algeria, and importantly, the western Sahara. These Sanhaja are often linked to the later Almoravid movement.
And from those broad categories established by Ibn Khaldun, we see this incredible mosaic of specific Amazigh groups across North Africa today, each with distinct characteristics, dialects. Can you give us a sense of that diversity?
It's truly vast. This incredible tapestry of groups spread across North Africa, each with unique traditions, languages, dialects, yet all somehow sharing that fundamental Amazigh identity of free people. It's remarkable. Just to give you a feel for the range, of course, we talked about the Imuhar or Tuareg, largely nomadic, found across Mali, Niger, Algeria, Libya, Burkina Faso, often linked historically to the Sanhaja. Then you have the Sanhaja themselves, or Zanaga, found in Mauritania, Western Sahara, the Draa River Valley in southern Morocco. Their specific language, Aznag or Taznat, is sadly nearly extinct now.
Nearly extinct, wow.
Yeah. Then the Mazmuda, a major tribal confederation, mainly in the High Atlas in central Morocco. They speak dialects like Jedfit, Rifi and Amizigh dialect, or Takbelit. The Izaten, or Zenata, one of the largest confederations historically found across northern Morocco, including the Rif Mountains and also northeastern Algeria, like Kabylie. They speak various Zenati dialects. Then there are the Zayanis in central and eastern Morocco, known for distinct cultural practices, speaking the Zayani language. The Shila, or Clia, in Morocco's High Atlas region, speak Pashtunaat. You also have the Klua of the Middle Atlas in Morocco, also Tashelhit speakers. The Sus Amazigh, sometimes called Sus Bergers, from the South Valley region of southern Morocco. The Anti-Atlas, they mostly speak Tashelhit too.
A lot of diversity just within Morocco.
Absolutely. Then the Rifians from the Rif area of northern Morocco, speaking Terafit or Rifian. And interestingly, there's also a group referred to as Rif Amazigh, or Rif Berbers, also in northern Morocco, also speaking Terafit, but who culturally and sociopolitically distinguish themselves somewhat from the broader Rifian identity. Nuances matter. Moving over to Algeria. The Chenua or Chenua in western Algeria, near the coast, in the Kabylia region, they speak the Chenua language, which is a Zenati variant. The Mizab people in the unique Nzab Valley speak Mozabite, another Zenati variety. The Sahrawi people, primarily associated with Western Sahara, but also found in parts of southern Morocco and the extreme southwest of Algeria. Linguistically, they currently speak Hassaniya Arabic, which is actually an Arabic-based Creole language with significant Amazigh influence in its structure and vocabulary.
Ah, Creole language. Interesting.
Yes. Then the Kabyles, perhaps the most dominant Amazigh group in Algeria today, primarily in the Kabylia region east of Algiers. They speak Kabyle and include subgroups like the famous Athieni artisans. There are also other groups mentioned in sources like the Ganziga, Tirga, and Berdua in Algeria, each associated with their own language variants. And in Libya, groups like the Lemta around Tripoli, speaking the Lemta language. It's just a truly vibrant and diverse collection of cultures, all connected under that Amazigh umbrella.
It really is. And what about the Guanches? The indigenous people of the Canary Islands. They seem like a fascinating, almost isolated branch of this story.
They absolutely are. The Guanches are generally understood as the aboriginal inhabitants of the Canary Islands. They're seen as heirs of ancient cultures from both Europe and North Africa, who developed this very unique identity in the isolation of the archipelago, the 7 main islands. And the compelling link is the archaeological connection, their material culture, their pottery, tools, burial practices. It shows strong ties to North African Amazigh culture, particularly parallels with the Moroccan Atlas, Tunisia, Algeria, Libya. The consensus is that Amazigh settled the Canary Islands probably around the middle of the first millennium BC, and they significantly influenced Guanche culture, including their mystical and spiritual beliefs and practices.
But their population declined dramatically after European colonization, didn't it? What's the connection today?
Sadly, yes. The Guanches largely vanished as a distinct population after European conquest and settlement began in the 15th century. This happened through a combination of conflict, disease, assimilation, intermarriage with settlers, or some remaining isolated in remote mountain areas. Now, regarding ancestry, there was a claim by Antonio Remy de Arma back in the 1960s that maybe over 90% of Tenerife's population had Guanche ancestry.
90%. That seems high.
It does seem high, and modern genetic studies suggest a lower, though still significant, figure. Researchers today estimate that perhaps around 30% of the current population of the Canary Islands are descendants of the Guanches. So a significant genetic and cultural legacy remains, even if the distinct Guanche culture itself largely disappeared.
Okay, so after surveying all these incredibly diverse groups, their histories, their locations, can we even put a number on the total Amazigh population today?
It's still really challenging to give a single, concise, accurate number, mostly due to insufficient or inconsistent census data across all the different countries. The largest concentrations are definitely in Algeria, where estimates suggest they make up maybe a quarter of the population, and Morocco, where it could be roughly 3/5, so a majority.
Okay, significant numbers here.
Very significant. But it's also important, as we touched on, that many people of Amazigh descent today don't necessarily identify primarily as Amazigh due to centuries of Arabization and cultural assimilation, particularly in urban areas. However, we look just at the Imuhar, the Tuareg population, across those vast Sahara regions of southern Algeria, Libya, Mali, Niger, Estimates suggest their numbers are beyond 2 million.
Hmm.
And that's just one major branch, not counting the many millions in the Atlas Mountains, Kabylia, and elsewhere. So overall, we're talking tens of millions of people with Amazigh heritage or identity.
Tens of millions.
Okay.
Let's shift focus now and explore the reach of Amazigh history in another direction. The profound impact of Islam on their culture and political landscape.
Right. The arrival of Islam and Arab culture from the 7th century onwards had a massive impact. Many Amazigh tribes, especially those in the Western Sahara who became Arabic-speaking, were deeply influenced by Arab culture and came to be collectively labeled by outsiders as Moors. Interestingly, when Arabs first arrived, they recruited Berber fighters for the conquest of Spain. And in doing so, they often applied that label Barbar to many diverse Berber groups, which, somewhat ironically, helped consolidate them under a single, albeit external, identity and certainly accelerated the process of Islamization across North Africa.
Right, consolidating them in a way.
Exactly. And this also paved the way for the rise of incredibly powerful Berber ruling dynasties who actually came to dominate not just North Africa, but Islamic Spain, Al-Andalus. Think of the Almoravids and the Almohads between the 11th and 13th centuries. These movements originated among Amazigh groups, Sahara nomads for the Almoravids, high Atlas villagers for the Almohads, and they used this power base to conquer Muslim Spain and huge swaths of North Africa, reaching as far east as Tripoli. And even after them, successor dynasties like the Marinids in Morocco, the Zionids in Algeria, the Hafsids in Tunisia, largely of Amazigh origin, continued to govern large parts of the region right up until the 16th century. It shows immense political and military influence.
Absolutely. Now let's get into something really intriguing and often debated. The theory of pre-Columbian contact between Africans, including potentially Amazigh people, and the Americas. This is where the story really takes an unexpected turn, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And yes, it's a hotly debated topic, but one with persistent threads of evidence. Authors like Ivan van Sertima really push this idea of the African presence in ancient America into wider discussion. Now, the theory often focuses on historical accounts, but also agricultural evidence, linguistic similarities. The idea isn't necessarily about large-scale colonization, but perhaps visits by traders, explorers, maybe Arabs, Muslims, potentially including people of a Amazigh background from North Africa or Islamic Spain. And what keeps the debate alive are things like these claimed similarities in vocabulary between some North African Amazigh dialects and certain Native American languages. Some researchers argue these are more than a mere coincidence.
Okay, so can you elaborate on some of the specific historical accounts or linguistic evidence that proponents point to?
Well, one line of thought is that Muslims, perhaps from Islamic Spain where there was a large population of Amazigh descent, might have made voyages across the Atlantic possibly as early as the 700 CE. Some theories even speculate about potential intermarriage with Native Americans, leaving traces of Arab or African influence. Though, it has to be said, that specific claim about widespread crossbreeding faces strong criticism due to a lack of conclusive genetic or immunological evidence in native populations.
Right, the genetic evidence is key there.
It is.
Yeah.
But then you have specific studies, like the 1930 thesis by French commandant Jules Cauvet. He did this detailed comparison, examining 77 tribal names that appear remarkably similar on both sides of the Atlantic. He categorized them and claimed that 46 of these names seemed to come directly from Africa. For example, he compared the Atlantesis tribe in America with the Atlantes people mentioned way back by Herodotus in North Africa. He linked the Bagheris with the ancient Bukoids tribe, the Bukoyas with the Bukoya of the Rif Mountains in Morocco, the Ghaznawa with the Ghaznaya also of the Rif, the Guanches obviously, the Hogara.
That's a lot of clean parallels.
It is, and Cauvet's argument was that these names found among American tribes seem to belong to both inland Amazigh groups and coastal Atlantic Amazigh. His hypothesis was that coastal tribes likely organized the expeditions, but gathered participants from a wider spectrum of Amazigh peoples for these potential voyages. He also had other categories names possibly arriving via Europe, or maybe from Asia, Africa through other routes, and some with unclear origins. Other intriguing examples often cited include the Galibis, a small tribe noted in Brazil, which some try to connect linguistically to Timbuktu, or the Marabitine from Sudan compared to tribal names found in Brazil, Nicaragua, Venezuela.
Fascinating linguistic threads. What about geography? Could ocean currents have played a role in making such voyages feasible?
That's a really important factor proponents point to, the ocean currents, specifically the Gulf Stream system. Part of it flows from near Florida eastward across the Atlantic, eventually reaching the coasts of North Africa and parts of Europe. So, theoretically, this current could facilitate eastward travel, potentially explaining how American plants, or maybe even people aborigines, as some early accounts call them, might have ended up on Amazigh territory, or vice versa, for westward travel with other currents like the Canaries current.
Ah, the current's acting like a conveyor belt.
In a way, yes. And adding to this, there are observations from some unnamed anthropologists mentioned in the sources. They reported encountering people in parts of the Sahara who bore, in their view, a striking resemblance to American Indians. Similar physical traits, but also claim similarities in names, naming conventions, tribal titles. They even noted Saharan women who, they felt, could be mistaken for American Indians, and who distinguished themselves locally by preferring tents over the more common mud brick houses. Anecdotal, perhaps, but intriguing observations.
And the agricultural evidence seems quite compelling too, doesn't it? It's not just about people possibly crossing, but plants too.
Yes, the botanical evidence is a major pillar of the pre-Columbian contact theory. For example, early names for maize, corn in Europe like Trigo de Tarabia in Spain or Guxpee wheat in Portugal, are cited as possible evidence that maize was known or cultivated in parts of Africa, Asia Minor, maybe Europe before Columbus.
Before Columbus.
That's the claim. People like Graham Jeffries argued that Arab or African travelers might have actually brought Zea maize back across the Atlantic from the Americas much earlier. And there's more comprehensive work, too. John Sorensen and Carl Johannesson published a major review in 2004, Scientific Evidence for Pre-Columbian Transoceanic Voyages. They compiled evidence for numerous species transfers across oceans before 1492. For instance, they list the prickly pear cactus, the lima bean traveling from the Americas to India, guava from the Americas reaching China and Polynesia, the potato getting from South America to Easter Island, and controversially, they include corn maize possibly moving from the Americas to Eurasia and Africa pre-Columbus. It's a huge compilation suggesting ancient seafaring was more extensive than often thought.
And it's not just European or African sources hinting at this, but even historical accounts from China.
That's another fascinating piece of the puzzle. Song Dynasty Chinese documents dating from 1178 and 1225 were presented by Professor Huilin Li. These documents apparently mention Arab ships traveling far west of the known Mohammedan world. They describe voyages potentially reaching the Atlantic coast of Africa and then discovering a new, unknown country after a long sea journey westward. This suggests perhaps back and forth travel and maybe even trade happening across the Atlantic in the 12th and 13th centuries involving Arab or Muslim seafarers. And another point often raised is the role Muslims played in later European expeditions. They often served as experienced map makers and guides, which some interpret as suggesting they already had traced maps pointing to the New World before Europeans like Columbus got there.
Guides who already knew the way.
That's the implication some draw. For example, Christopher Columbus himself famously had a Moorish guide, Luz de la Torre, who was actually his interpreter. And we have the documented story of Estevanico, a Moroccan guide from Azamor, likely of Amazigh background. He's noted as one of the very first documented Muslims, and indeed Africans, in North America, landing in Florida in 1527 as part of a Spanish expedition.
Estevanico, right?
Yeah. And there's evidence of Moors exiled from Spain being present in places like South Carolina in the late 18th century. So a continuous, if often overlooked, presence. But perhaps the most cited and earliest accounts come from the 9th, 10th century Muslim historian and geographer Ali al-Masudi. In his famous work, The Golden Meadows, Muruj al-Dhahab, written around 947 CE, he recounts tales he heard. One is about a Muslim navigator from Cordoba, Spain, named Kashkash ibn Sa'id ibn Aswad. The sources transliterate this differently, sometimes as Basaf-Bas. Around 8889 CE, this Kashkash supposedly sailed from Delba, which is thought to be Palos, the same port Columbus later used across the Atlantic westward, reached an unknown territory referred to as Ardmatula, unknown land, and actually returned with fabulous treasure.
Returned with treasure.
That's the story al-Masudi recorded. He also mentions other accounts from the mid-10th century of Muslims, possibly of African origin, sailing westward from Delba into the ocean of darkness and fog, the Atlantic, and returning with valuable goods. Ardmashula is described as a large landmass somewhere southwest of Africa in the Atlantic. Many proponents see these as clear references to the Americas. For anyone wanting to explore these ideas further, Heinke Sudhoff's 1994 book, Sorry Columbus, Ancient Mariners Discovered America First, delves into some of this, including even earlier possibilities. Sudhoff discusses potential Phoenician or other Semitic voyages to America way back in the first millennium BC, noting that Cadiz in Spain was founded around 1200 BC as a Phoenician outpost, And Carthage, later in the 9th century BC, became a major port, with seafarers sailing beyond the Pillars of Gibraltar, Strait of Gibraltar. And interestingly, this time frame overlaps with the rise of the Olmec civilization in Mesoamerica, which some researchers have controversially tried to link to African influences, though that's highly debated.
Wow. We have certainly journeyed through an incredibly rich, complex, and often surprising tapestry of the Amazigh people today, from understanding their preferred names, that powerful free man identity, to their enduring culture shaped by core values like hospitality and independence. Through their complex, multifaceted origins, debated across numerous theories, the amazing resilience of their ancient language family, and then tracing these unexpected historical connections, their influence during the Islamic Golden Age, and these really provocative, challenging theories about transatlantic contact that stretch across continents and really push us to rethink conventional narratives of global exploration and discovery.
Absolutely. And I think what emerges strongly, especially today, is that while the Amazigh people may have lacked consistent singular political unity across their vast history and geography, their language, or rather languages, and their deep cultural identity remain the most distinguishing characteristics connecting these diverse groups. Their life, their presence, remains incredibly vivid and enduring through millennia. It's a testament to a unique, deeply rooted identity that continues to evolve.
It really is. So the question we leave you with is this. What more might be waiting to be discovered about these ancient, deeply interconnected histories? And how does learning about the Amazigh story, in all its complexity, challenge our conventional, maybe simplified, understandings of global history and exploration? As you reflect on this deep dive, maybe consider how these multi-layered narratives, these hidden connections, might shift your own perspective on the past and how our world came to be.